Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and today we're diving into a fascinating and often misunderstood topic in bodybuilding, the role of novelty in training. To help us unpack it, I'm thrilled to welcome back Dr. Eric Trexler. It's been too long. He is an expert in exercise science and an accomplished bodybuilder himself, and someone who is no stranger to tackling big questions like this around muscle growth and performance. So we'll explore everything from the myths of muscle confusion to the science behind when and how novelty might play an actual role in your gains. Plus, Eric will share what's new with him, whether it's his latest research interests, teaching endeavors, or his own journey back into training after some surgery, and how he's experiencing those sweet newbie gains all over again. As a reminder, guys, here at Revive Stronger, we are online coaches. We pride ourselves on keeping coaching very personal through our video check-ins, but also allowing our clients to send in video check-ins so they can communicate what's going well, what isn't going well, any questions or concerns they have very clearly with us. That's something that we really pride ourselves on, and it's the cornerstone of successful coaching is communication. So if you want to learn more about our coaching and the way that we go about things, that's always linked in the description. We can get a consultation going. You can chat with me or one of the coaches on the team. But make sure to stick around to the end of this podcast, as we'll break down some actionable advice on how to strategically use novelty without letting it derail your progress. Let's get into the chat. Eric, it's as we were just saying off air, it's been a little while since we've been able to catch up. Too long, I feel, but a lot has happened on your end. As we were just saying, you're a busy man, and I thought a little bit of an update on you, how things are. Love to hear about it. I feel like you teased about even this sounds completely wild to me when I think about it, but teased about even getting back into competitive bodybuilding. But I don't know why I feel like that happened somewhere. It might have been a joke knowing you.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's good to be back. Good to see you. Always love being back on the show. Yeah, a lot going on in my world. So I'm still doing research in Herman Pontzer's lab at Duke University, where we study really everything that falls under that umbrella of exercise, physical activity, energy expenditure, and health. So it's a really broad mandate that we have. So our research varies all the way from really like applied studies that aim to improve the health of pastors in America, all the way to things involving research in hunter-gatherer societies, and really including like kind of big picture theoretical questions like how much energy do we burn when being active, and to what extent is that stable versus variable? And we certainly are of the belief that it's quite variable, which is not unique to humans, in fact. And our kind of biggest question that we're trying to chip away at is what dictates the amount of total calories we're burning during high activity periods versus low activity periods, and what are the components of energy expenditure that are malleable enough to keep energy expenditure somewhat constrained within a workable range. And like, I mentioned it's not unique to humans. Like there's some really cool research that Herman just showed me on birds when they have periods of really intensive migration and then periods where they're like their wings are molting and they literally can't fly. And what you find is their activity, if you literally track them, with various technologies, their activity level is wildly fluctuating throughout this annual cycle, but their total energy expenditure stays pretty flat, going from periods where they are literally flying constantly during migration all the way to periods where briefly they literally can't fly. And so what you see is that the relative cost of activity shrinks down to this really tiny level during these high activity migration periods. And so, even though they're being super active, there's some element of efficiency that's being adjusted. And then the expenditure on everything that's not literally flying shrinks down really low to kind of level that out throughout the year. So anyway, big aside, but we have a lot of cool stuff going on in the lab. We even, do some energy expenditure work with some pretty high level athletes. So a lot of fun stuff over there. On top of that, I'm doing some teaching again for the first time in, probably first time since like 2016. So it's been almost a decade, but I'm doing some teaching at Duke University as well. And then, yeah, of course, doing everything with mass. I recently published the thing I've been talking about for years now, which is a pretty intensive guide to kind of understanding and interpreting statistics. A lot of the folks that we make content for, whether it's Iron Culture Podcast or within the pages of mass, a lot of people do read studies independently. And, you know, I think it's probably not controversial to say that the fitness enthusiasts who do read research on their own, probably the biggest area where there is a lack of confidence or, pretty prevalent confusion really does pertain to the statistical analyses that we see in research papers. So it felt really good to get that off my desk because I've been tinkering with it forever. But yeah, so that's available to mass subscribers now. So yeah, a lot going on in terms of competing. That might have gotten misinterpreted through a game of telephone, maybe. I could have just made a joke that didn't land about it. Who knows? Excuse me. But the big thing for me right now with training is I had been basically out of commission with an injury. So I had this nerve injury that got progressively worse over a 7-year period. And for the last couple years, it got to the point where it didn't just impact my training. It impacted, like, can I stand for long periods of time comfortably? Can I walk, even just like daily kind of walking, not like going for a 4-mile trek. So it was really starting to impact just my ability to be an active person who completes activities of daily living. So I finally ended up getting surgery, and there's been a lot of fanfare and celebration on my end because after trying every non-surgical option for 7 years of this, finally I'm back in the gym training the way I like to. There's some minor modifications that I make to my training, but I'm finally training in a way that resembles why I like training and what I like to do in the gym. So I've kind of been just celebrating that every opportunity I get of just being back in the gym and having fun with it. So probably not competing, but definitely loving training like a bodybuilder again, for sure.
That's awesome. Lots of awesome stuff, particularly for me, just thinking about like an injury that's set you out from the gym. It's the worst thing ever, let alone one that's been there for 7 years. So yeah, I imagine it's a bit of a new lease on life, getting it back into the gym and feeling like you can train hard again. Yeah. Does the injury you've got, do you think it stops you competing in terms of, can you not hit certain poses, or does it lead to, I don't know, some atrophy in certain muscles compared to where they were once before?
No, I don't think it necessarily stops me. It's interesting because the type of injury I have is it's a nerve entrapment, and it's a real nasty one that it goes kind of through the inguinal space and like lower abdomen hip region. And so the most troubling symptom that was really getting in my way was these super painful, erratic spasms of muscles. Basically, that entrapped nerve was just sending these contraction signals to these random muscles, and it was, it was not the type of thing that you could ignore or train around or train through. I mean, it's like you're literally, you have these muscles just like cramping up and tightening to a ball painfully, really. And it was like, anytime I hit a number of different, or anytime I was in a number of different postures or positions. So, like I said, at first it was just like, oh, I can't do squats the way I like to, but then it gets worse and worse and worse. And now it's like, I can't really stand up straight for more than like a few minutes without it starting to fire up. So the surgery I got was actually to just detach the muscle that was most annoying, that it was kind of, sending that erroneous contraction signal to. Tiny little muscle, redundant, don't need it, not going to matter, wouldn't impact my ability to be a bodybuilder in any way. But the root issue is still there. Like that nerve is still entrapped. So the surgery did not resolve that. So I'm not at 100%. I'm just at a spot where I can train and where it's actually just feasible to train around it, So I could compete with this, but I think, I mean, Steve, as well as anybody, like to get to the point where you want to compete, you have to be like, you have to not just be like a coin flip, like 51% of me wants to compete. So now I'm over the halfway point. It's got to be like, nothing will stop me from competing, right? It's a completely different level of having your sight on that goal. I know what goes into it. And that doesn't call to me right now, especially because like, yeah, for now, it's kind of, I mean, you can imagine essentially not training for 2 years, pretty much. Like I got nothing going on in terms of bodybuilding. Like I need to like actually get strong and muscular again and then start saying, I wonder what I would look like if I lost some fat, so that's a long ways off.
This actual chat might actually segue quite nicely into our discussion, which I won't jump to just yet because I think I have some other questions surrounding what you're doing. In terms of for the audience, they would have heard an intro talk about Novelty, but that makes me think of like muscle memory. And I guess, have you been seeing kind of quite rapid gains, at least in the areas that you've been able to train properly again?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's been the only kind of upside of being out of commission and just training really poorly for 2 years and essentially not at all for one leading into the surgery was like, it's like back when I was like 19 and started training intelligently for the first time again. And so the gains have been coming fast, which has been really fun. It's I started lifting when I was 12. It's been a long time since I went into the gym every week and realistically expected to be stronger each time. And that is definitely my experience right now. So the strength gains, the muscle gains are definitely as rapid as I've experienced since, for well over a decade.
I think you can expect that for 6 months, maybe more. I'm not sure.
So I'm really curious about that. And like my whole thing with, being someone who's been lifting from the age of 12 till now and being someone who's been really like, I started strength coaching and coaching people at 18. Like I always knew this was going to be what I was into and being into the research for all this time. When I have setbacks, I don't do like the motivational kind of, hey, look for the bright side. I genuinely do get intrigued by some of the weird curveballs that life has thrown me and the ability to experience different things. So I am curious to see how long this will last in general, just from the perspective of going from detrained to trained. And I do expect that I can probably keep this going for several months. I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking more like a year than 6 months. I mean, and it's not going to be linear, but I think there's a lot of gains to be had on the table. The other thing I'm really intrigued about, I know this is turning into the Eric Trexler sob story over here, but while this was all going on and my activity level, let alone training, just everything was kind of grinding to a halt because like standing up was a bit iffy. So clearly I'm not like running 20 miles a week. While that was going on, I also started taking a medication where a known side effect is weight gain. Basically, it drives your appetite through the roof.
Wow.
And not exercising actually messes up your appetite regulation. So all that is to say, I am not only detrained, I have more body fat than I've ever had in my life. And what we know from the fat-free mass index literature is that the highest fat-free mass index values we tend to observe are from people with higher body fat levels. It's the highest ever are sumo wrestlers. The other like alarmingly high values are defensive linemen. I'm not in sumo wrestler body fat range, but I am the highest body fat I've ever been. So I'm not going to be able to really intelligently separate out what am I tapping into here from having higher body fat than ever before? And what am I tapping into from being untrained? Surely, or I should say detrained, if I want to be technically correct. Surely the effect of being detrained is going to be the much more substantial component of these rapid gains. But what I'm curious about is after that initial phase that I would have achieved at any body fat level, do I find that having a little extra cushion that I've not allowed myself to have over many years, does that help me kind of tap into another gear that extends that really rapid progress phase from maybe from a 7-month period to like a 10-month period? And maybe I achieve some muscularity levels that I've not yet achieved. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what that's going to look like. And I am weaning off that medication so that hopefully I can stop eating everything in sight someday. But yeah, so it's funny because I'll talk to people about this and I'm usually pretty candid about it and pretty transparent. And it's not fun to be a fitness professional and say, hey, I'm glad you asked. I'm fatter and weaker than I've ever been in my adult life. So things are great. But at the same time, it's been quite a learning experience. And it's going to be interesting to kind of come through the other side of that with a lot more empathy and a lot more understanding of some of these relationships of detraining, retraining, bulking at moderate body fats versus higher body fats. There's going to be a lot to be learned there. And that is a valuable thing.
Sounds like you just pulled out a motivational silver lining to me, Eric.
You're
going to revive stronger.
No, I hear you. And it totally sounds that way on the surface, but part of it is just being a weird guy and just being intrigued by the new experience. It's a way to, like I was kind of getting at, I don't know if I really drove the point home very clearly, but having been involved in this and doing it a certain way and having a certain set of experiences over a 20-year period, starting at 12, I kind of felt like my experience with this whole process got to the point where I've seen everything, right? Everything I'm going to see with the normal circumstances in my life, I've kind of ridden those up and downs and learned from them. And I did not expect to see a period like the one I'm experiencing now, where it is brand new, a set of circumstances that I've not really interacted with from all these weird kind of extenuating circumstances. So it is just kind of being intrigued. Like when I got into bodybuilding, Helms and I always joke about this. Helms got into bodybuilding because he appreciates the art of bodybuilding and the culture of like he loves the sport as a sport. I got into it because I thought it was pretty weird to see what happens when you almost starve as a competitive endeavor. I find it to be interesting more than I find it to be a beautiful thing or an intrinsically valuable endeavor. And so I kind of have the same approach to whatever the heck I'm doing right now, which is just like, this is weird. I'm like experiencing lifting in a completely different set of circumstances that previously were not open to me. And so I'll learn from that. And of course, I would have loved to just stay like pretty jacked all the way through, but it'll be, I think, even more rewarding to kind of have the lows and kind of get back to a high spot.
For sure. I really hope, but I imagine you didn't take any photos of like your before. Have you done, or have you taken any measurements or anything like that?
I might have a few photos of rock bottom. So the thing about those is that they are grim. So no one in the world is going to see those until they hack my iCloud or I'm actually like pretty jacked again. And then I can share them as a celebratory thing more so than a like, oh God, look how rough things have gotten,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. It's hard when you're in the moment of the lows to kind of take photos and get that kind of accounted for, because you don't want to, you want to forget it. But when you look back at such photos, like I look back at me when I was after my accident and my skinniest over 10 years ago now, and I look back, I'm like, wow, I was so skinny, and like, look at that. And I'm like, I'm glad I have those photos to account for how bad, because I can see the photo and then I'm like, oh, the memory pops in. That's how I felt. Wow, I'm so grateful for where I am now. So hopefully you get those moments well, you're already probably getting some of them now.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, if you've been doing this long enough, like Steve, if you woke up tomorrow and for whatever reason you had a ton of atrophy, you gained a whole bunch of fat, and someone would say, what now? I mean, there's not a lot of question in your head. You know the process, you know it needs to be done, you know how long it'll take, and you have all the confidence in the world that it'll happen and you'll get there. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. You know, I'm certain that it's going to be a wild ride and it'll take a while, but I'm excited to kind of get back to that peak. And if nothing else, that's actually been that can be both positive and negative. So people like us who have been there before, we have the confidence in knowing what needs to be done. We have the self-efficacy that we know we can do it because we have. But it also gives you a certain level of confidence that if you're not careful can lead you to procrastinating, because you're like, oh, I could turn that on anytime. I can flip that switch and get this all corrected. And so you have to be wary of that if you're, and this is like a generalizable little note for anyone who's been in really, really good shape and then finds themselves in pretty poor shape, is like, you have to make sure that you're not complacent with the fact that you know you can do it. You really do have to be pretty adamant with yourself of like, okay, we know how to do it. We know we can do it, but let's go ahead and start now and make sure that we're not pushing that off because our confidence level is so high. You know, it's great that you're not panicked, but it's also probably time to get rolling, you know? So that's, I've been pushing it pretty hard for about a month. You know, kind of had my surgery, recovered from the surgery, was doing just kind of rehab type stuff. And for about a month, I've been pushing it really hard and just having so much fun. It's been great.
What does that look like for you? Have you tapered volume up? I'm guessing you at like 6 days a week.
Oh,
you just love it that much, or did you?
Yeah.
You just get soreness everywhere and couldn't train for a week.
I was talking to Helms about this. Like, I know that at a certain point, I will have to optimize my training, you know, in order to, you know, very intelligently induce a stimulus to promote growth, and balancing that stimulus against my recovery capacity and so on. That's not where I am right now. I could, if I just walked on a treadmill, I'd grow leg mass after that surgery, right? So for me, I thought, it's the same way. I'm not a hypocrite. It's the same way that I teach people when they're first getting into lifting. The most important thing you can do in the first 6 months is fall in love. And so for me, I am giving myself the grace of just saying, Eric, fall back in love with lifting. Go in and have fun. Do what calls to you. And I've been loving it. So I've been going in mostly doing I've been doing an upper lower split. So I'm going into the gym and I'm either doing an upper body day or a lower body day. And I'd say I'm averaging about 3 of each per week. So I'm going like 6-day upper lower, tons of volume, totally unnecessary. I could be getting the same growth with less, but I'm getting more fun out of it. So it works for me. So yeah, I've just been doing really high volume, 6-day upper lower split, totally bodybuilding oriented, as much protein as I can stomach. And it's just been awesome.
Does that mean you're not tracking calories and you're just monitoring body weight and letting it kind of?
And I'm not even worried about body weight. You know, I am in that phase right now where I know if I overshoot my calories and go into positive energy balance, I'm just going to grow faster. And if I'm a little bit under, I'm just going to recomp because there's so much detraining and my body fat's high enough to facilitate it. So for me, knowing that there's no real risk of missing a little bit in either direction, I've just been trying to eat plenty of protein, you know, distribute it sensibly throughout the day, and eat what I consider kind of just a health compatible diet. Make sure I'm getting in my fiber, make sure I'm getting in, you know, fruits and vegetables. So I'm not sweating the little stuff yet. And again, I will need to eventually. But for now, the only goal is get stronger, build a bunch of muscle, have fun. And so it's kind of like if if some like 16-year-old kid were to come to you for help and say, hey, I want to be really good at football, what should I do? You should live in the gym. You should fall in love with the gym, eat a bunch of protein, and think about the gym and your sport 24 hours a day. Like that's what you need at 16 years old. And you're going to grow like a weed. That's pretty much how I'm approaching it. And eventually I will start to get more serious and say, okay, Eric, you're running your body into the ground with all the volume. So you got to get a little smarter, or else you're not going to make the kind of progress you want. And, and then eventually also I'll have to do something about all that fat that I gained. So that'll be, not quite as fun as this initial phase. So we'll think of that part later.
Yeah, it does sound fun, actually. It sounds like, well, I'm imagining when you start the gym, but you have all the knowledge of what you've experienced throughout the years, like it's now like, oh, you can actually enjoy that. Whereas it's kind of, you enjoy it when you first start. You don't really know what to expect. And so part of not knowing what to expect makes that process a bit challenging in some ways. So it's nice that you're just like, embrace it, have fun. And I think it's actually funny. It makes me think of, because this podcast exists, social media exists. So kids are getting into they're maybe even finding this podcast or finding information online about how to lift and how to optimize before they get into the gym. It's like, ooh, actually part of me is grateful that I just got into the gym because my bros were going and I was like, that looks like fun. And there's a big guy in the gym who just said, yeah, do a kind of chest back leg split and just like try and beat your performance every week. I'm like, oh, cool, fun. Eat protein and go. Part of me, hopes that people could not miss out on that and focus too heavily on optimization too soon. Yeah.
I think if you were to take a bunch of early to intermediate lifters, right? And you were to, put together a little predictive model of who's had the most success in the first 2 years of their lifting career, maybe 3 years. What you're going to find is the big drivers there are going to be genetic predisposition, nothing you can do about it. Did you put a ton of effort in, and did you fall in love with it? Like, and those two are highly correlated, right? Like if you love it, you'll put in the effort. As you put in the effort, you'll love it more. Like those three things are really dictating, frankly, in my opinion, the first 2 to 3 years of gains you're going to see as a lifter. Then once you kind of progress into people and say, okay, you've been lifting for 25 years, let's just look at the gains you've made in the last 3, so from year 22 to 25, that's where you're going to see that the important predictive factors are. I sensibly handled my volume. I was on a good split. I ate that's when the details start to matter. And so I'm kind of modeling my process the same way, where it's like, there's no point in me jumping all the way into the deep end and worrying about the little stuff when I have so just low hanging fruit. Like, just go enjoy the gains and we'll tighten that stuff up when it's time.
Yeah, for sure. And the great thing with that is it becomes a habit then and part of your lifestyle. And that's the cornerstone to it all. So that's fantastic. And like I said, I could talk about a lot of the things you mentioned that you're working on currently, but maybe that's for another time, because we have this, I've set it up to be spoken about novelty. And I think that the kind of thing you're going through now is very, very novel. So it does lead its way into this discussion of, people will have heard about novelty. Some people would have heard about muscle confusion and how that's maybe a bad thing, a bit of a myth. You don't want to confuse the muscles. You want to kind of focus on progressive overload. But also people would have heard about novelty as sparking gains. And so I thought what might be prudent is to start off with what you would define novelty as. I have a definition in mind, but I'd be interested to know what your kind of definition might be.
Okay. Yeah. Novelty, as it pertains to training, what I think of is a substantive manipulation of training variables, or one's approach to training, that leads to a meaningfully distinct stimulus to the muscles being trained. That's kind of my off-the-cuff definition. What are you working with?
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. Additionally, you get access to our exclusive Revive Stronger member site, where you'll be able to watch over hundreds of hours worth of educational content. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah, I put you on the spot there, so I've had time to think about it a little bit at least. Mine is quite simple. I was just like, hey, doing something the body isn't adapted to. So
yeah, that's easier. Yeah,
completely different. But it's very much in line with kind of what you mentioned there. So I kind of laid some of the framework in terms of people coming to think about novelty. I think that they do have those two things in mind of people have spoken about it being like it can spark growth and novelty can be a good thing, but also, hey, it can also be a negative thing. So what have we got many studies that have kind of looked at novelty as it pertains to muscle growth?
You know, I would say one of my favorite ones, honestly, of the ones I've done, you know, obviously I'm a researcher of topics that include resistance training, but I wouldn't call myself a resistance training researcher, right? Like I don't have a ton of experimental studies coming out where I do, you know, really nuanced modification of training variables to assess the impact. But one study I did publish was on fat-free mass index, and it was in really high-level athletes. These were like very legit Division I college football players. And in America, Division I college football is, I'd have to look at the numbers, but maybe the second most popular sport behind only professional football, like in terms of viewership and the kind of money that's flowing in. So high level Division I college football in America is big business, and they take it seriously. And so we did a study on these athletes who are, you know, finely tuned machines, that they are serious lifters. And we were specifically in one of the papers looking at linemen very closely, because these are just huge, remarkably strong, powerful, muscular people. But we had basically 4 years of longitudinal data on these athletes from the time they came into the program to the time they graduated with a 4-year college degree. And what we saw was linear increases in fat-free mass, approximately linear, over the first 3 years, roughly. I mean, you could look at the figure and call me a liar. That's how my brain stored it away. I think we published it in 2017. But the real take home, the point that I will defend aggressively, is that we saw a pretty unexpected spike, I believe, in year 4. So normally you would expect gains to kind of follow a fairly logarithmic curve, especially knowing that these folks were already recruited and brought into the program because they were already big and muscular, right? So we would expect, okay, your first year in college, you got better coaches, better food, better everything. A lot of growth in year 1, but we expect that to taper off and kind of flatten by year 4, because the whole point of a college football program is they want to get you to your max, get you to your peak as soon as possible and keep you there. So we saw this big spike very unexpectedly late in the trajectory. And in talking with the strength and conditioning staff, it was revealed, oh yeah, we really overhauled our training programming there, and through a completely different approach to training at these athletes. Like we, around year 3, really did some soul searching and decided we were going to revamp our philosophical approach to how training works in this program. And so to me, that's way more valuable in my mind. I'm biased. It's my paper. But to me, that kind of data is way more valuable than saying, hey, we took some untrained people and we did this for 8 weeks, then we did that for 4 weeks, and things changed, right? Because to me, a lot of the people listening, what we want to know is, if I start messing with some exercise variety and I start doing that right now, 12 years into my lifting career, am I going to notice something, right? And the thing about untrained people is that they respond to things quickly, they detrain quickly. Like, it's just, everything's moving and kind of changing in response to these. Basically, the easy way to say it is, when you're untrained, everything's a novel stimulus, right? So yeah, the research would definitely tell us that there are examples, not just in laboratory research, but also in, some of these more applied kind of real world observational studies on pretty elite athletes, indicating that absolutely, when you inject some degree of substantial change and variety into what you're doing, that some kind of novel stimulus, then we can expect some kind of novel adaptation to that stimulus. And that really, it kind of has to be true, I would argue, to some extent. I mean, you can dig into the details of where exactly it applies and what we can expect based on a particular set of changes. But one of the most foundational principles of lifting is the principle of specificity, which is what you train for directly and very specifically influences what kind of adaptations you make. So if the novelty is, whatever change you're making is bringing something truly new to the table in terms of your training, you should expect that you're going to respond in a truly distinct way. Now, the last thing I'll say before handing it back to you for follow-ups or next question is novelty isn't always good. So you can change the stimulus for the better, you can change the stimulus for the different, or you can change the stimulus for the worse. And I think if we were to look back at what happened in those high level football players when they had that big programming change into year 4, I think that I'm quite confident you would look at what they were doing prior, what they changed to, and say these were substantive and pretty unequivocal improvements in their programming, which is important because sometimes when people talk about novelty or variety in their training, they think, well, what if we took what they were doing in year 3 and then switched to what they did in year 4 and got a big bump, and then switch back to what they did in year 3 and get another bump? No. I'm very confident that what we would see if they switched back would be a regression to where they had kind of settled or plateaued with what they had been doing prior.
Really interesting. I wasn't aware of that study, and it makes a lot of sense. And I'm really glad the way you described it, where it was novelty, but it was like, hey, intelligent, specific novelty towards muscle growth and almost learning from the past and adapting it to be better for future versus just blatant novelty. Yeah. And also it makes complete sense in regards to a lot of the training studies that have looked at, like, I don't know, varying load versus keeping it the same, or like rep ranges, for example, or even exercises, things like this, where it doesn't seem to be too impactful, especially when people are novice, because, hey, they're kind of growing from many, many things. And I think you mentioned some negatives, and I think a lot of people, when they think of novelty, they think of soreness, because typically that's kind of what drives soreness, is something you're not adapted to. That's almost like a very surefire way to do it. Do you think soreness can be a proxy for growth? What are your views on that?
I just think it's too unreliable to view it as a proxy for growth. I just don't think it provides the level of precision we need. Now, I'm human, so as I got back into training, I was like, listen, my repeated bout effect has expired, so everything I do right now is going to cause soreness. And that was true. I was really, really sore when I first started getting into things. And of course, if you are doing resistance training and you are inducing soreness, if nothing else, it tells you, hey, those muscles I was targeting, they were definitely doing something, right? But I think that's probably about as much as we can tell from soreness. And what you start to lose is, for example, any semblance of a dose response kind of relationship where more soreness means more growth. For example, if we wanted to, in a laboratory setting, induce the most soreness possible, we would use a muscle damage inducing protocol that is categorically not the best thing we could do for inducing muscle growth. So there are just some key elements where, when you kind of zoom out and look at, in those types of scenarios, how would we maximize soreness versus how would we maximize growth? They are different. And so that leads me to kind of intuitively conclude that we probably shouldn't assume that there's necessarily this perfect dose response relationship when we're talking about resistance training.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I think there's something nice about it, because when you think about the things that really lead to growth, that are specific to hypertrophy, they often do lead to soreness. Like you said, newbies, yourself, you're getting really, really sore. That's when you get your most sore and you grow the most.
Yeah.
Long muscle lengths, potentially changing exercises, sudden increases in volume, like doing higher volumes, all of these things. But I am very much in agreement with you, very much due to practical experience. It is so unreliable. I can literally just think of an example for me now. I did the same session last week. It got me sore. I did it this week. It didn't get me sore. The week before that, it also didn't get me sore. So it was like I wasn't sore, did get sore, and then didn't get sore. And it was like, that kind of doesn't make sense, because I progressed it. Nothing changed. I just can't think of a good reason why that would happen. And so it becomes unreliable for me too. Yeah. In many cases.
Yeah, and there's so many, when it comes to soreness, you have to wade into the murky area of a subjective assessment of how you feel, which is part biological and part psychological as well. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you have extra soreness and you're like, what happened here? And maybe it's that, like, you know, you were coming down with something, you didn't have any symptoms of an acute illness, but your body was working overtime, you know, and you had a pretty substantial immune response, and you're just throwing a lot at your body, and you kind of perceive that as some additional soreness of the normal training load plus, you know, immune system kind of putting in the extra effort. Sometimes, you know, I've talked to people whose soreness seems to vary based on the weather. You know, if it's colder out, you know, and they're just like, oh, I feel this cold deep down to my bones, you know. Honestly, this is something I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've worked with a lot of people in areas that don't, you know, they go through the winter with extremely minimal sunlight. So we're talking like high latitude geographical locations. And my limited, you know, totally cherry picked anecdote is like, honestly, my clients who live in those really high latitude areas during the winter, everything gets worse. You know, like motivation to train dips, general happiness dips, perceived soreness increases, you know, the little aches and pains get a lot more attention and get verbalized a little more. Like, there's so much that can go into how we perceive beyond the biological variability that exists. There's also this kind of, you know, multifaceted set of inputs that can dictate how we perceive and process the way our body feels. And so there's just too much going on.
For sure. And yeah, I think if it was a definitive proxy, I think about a time when I've been most sore in my kind of last few years was I didn't play football in ages, or soccer. I played like 7-a-side, and we played for an hour, and I just went for it. I used to play a lot, and I loved it. And I'm like fit, I'm healthy, I could go for it. But then the next day I was sore for like 2 weeks, like in my whole body. And I just think, part of me would like to think that soreness is like promoting growth, right? But I'm pretty sure that's not the way to grow, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've been, you know, fine-tuning your training for years and years and years for bodybuilding. You know what causes growth, and it's not going and playing more soccer, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's funny that way. But, you know, when it comes to this idea of novelty and growth and what we notice with soreness, I do want to give a little bit of credence to exercise variety in general. You know, so if you are doing this, you know, when I remember back in like 2013-ish, everyone was really into these like super minimalist powerlifting oriented programs. And everybody was basically saying like, hey, if you can bench 500, you won't have small pecs. And if you can deadlift 700, you won't have a small back. And if you can squat 700, you won't have small legs. So let's forget all the other crap, do the basics, barbell back squat, barbell bench press, barbell deadlift, throw in a row variation, a couple accessories, and that's everyone's training program for the next 10 years, right? And people ran into a lot of issues when they limited variety into this like really tiny set of exercises. And what we see with variety is, first of all, little tweaks to the way we adjust the setup for an exercise. So, you think about just the basic. Am I doing dumbbell curls, or am I doing dumbbell preacher curls, or am I doing dumbbell spider curls? These things do have a tendency to impact regional hypertrophy. So there's a classic study where they one group I think was just doing leg press or squat for their legs, and the other was doing a more comprehensive leg extension and squat and lunge, and they just were doing the same amount of overall leg volume but with 4 exercises instead of 1. And overall growth was similar, but the group that was doing the multifaceted 4 exercise protocol was getting much more even distribution of growth throughout different regions of the quads. So on the one hand, in a very practical sense, if you're interested in developing a really complete and well-rounded physique, exercise variety is going to come in handy as part of that. And in practice, that can look like variation over time, because it's very difficult. I mean, Steve, you've put together bodybuilding programs, especially if you're training with pretty high volume. It's hard to hit everything at every angle in the same program. And so it becomes kind of useful to say, like, in this program, I really want to pull out something special for the rear delts, but that's not something I can really keep in my program forever in perpetuity, because I got to hit everything else too, right? So variety in exercise selection from program to program can introduce a type of novelty that is very beneficial, as it kind of fills in some gaps and adds some completeness to the physique. So that can be a really positive thing. And then another practical thing with exercise variety and varying things over time is when you are doing that, for example, to pick on it, that super minimalist powerlifting program. Everyone does it for like 2 weeks and they're like, this is incredible. I'm the strongest person alive. I'm making gains in my big 3 like I've never made. And yeah, it's because it's all you're doing basically. But what happens when your shoulder starts bothering you, or your elbow starts bothering you, or your wrist, or you kind of tweak your lower back? That's where we start to see that a more well-rounded program can be really beneficial when you compare it to doing the same exercise with the same loading range in the same joint angles at the same tempo. Like, whatever is your weak link in the chain of that lift, you are just piling more and more and more and more on it, versus if you were saying, for my chest development, I'm doing incline in the Smith machine, and I'm doing that cable fly variation and maybe a flat dumbbell press. You're getting similar amounts of pressing volume, but whatever that weird little weak link that would have become a nagging annoyance if you just threw 20 sets of bench press at it, you don't run into that as much when you're doing 6 sets of this and 6 sets of that and 6 sets of the other. So there's some really practical advantages of having variety and varying your exercises over time.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I think being able to hit muscles differently, especially as a bodybuilder, it's pretty damn important. And yeah, like you said, the data is showing you can even get more distal or proximal growth depending on kind of what muscle length you're biasing or challenging more. So that makes a lot of sense. And then kind of navigating injuries for sure, kind of even motivation and staleness just from doing the same exercise. You mentioned actually the program I'm thinking of when you were talking through that. I don't know if it's the one that you did. I did Jim Wendler's Boring But Big. So it was 5-3-1, and it was just boring but big is 5-3-1 plus just more sets of 10 of like squats, of bench, of deadlift. And yeah, I mean, even to the point where some of those big 3 might not work well for some people. They might get joint connective tissue pain, what have you. It might just not be the best, most suitable exercise.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't thinking of that one specifically, but it really was a whole, like, do you remember what year you did that roughly?
It was like 2015.
Yeah, it was going around, man. It was going around. So there's a lot of people doing 5-3-1 variations that were very minimalistic. There's a lot of people who were, doing like Shaiko powerlifting programs and calling them bodybuilding programs because they're like, well, if it works for Russians, it works for me. So yeah, it was a weird time where everybody was just kind of saying, I could do what's always worked in bodybuilding, or I could do 30 sets of bench press, and people were going with the 30 sets of bench press, and it's worthwhile. Like, I think as much as I like to look back and poke fun, there's something weird, something in the water in like the 2012 to 2015 range. It was like everybody was doing the exact same things. There was like not enough. I think it was one of those things where we're just getting to that point where online kind of fitness communication was big enough to get out to people, but small enough that there was not a diversity of opinions really that was getting out to people. And so the way I recall it was that everybody was doing these really minimalist programs. Everybody was training for powerlifting, even though they had no interest in powerlifting, and they were bodybuilders exclusively. And everyone was doing a lot of really high intensity interval training and just absolutely spent. And that was probably good for the internet culture at the time, because people were so tired from their interval training that they were overdoing that they couldn't bring as much energy and vitriol to the online arguments. So yeah, that was a weird time where everybody was just training themselves into the dirt with 1,000 compounds and just inexplicable levels of high intensity interval training volume. And yeah, everyone was doing the same thing. We learned a lot from it. It was a good little phase, but I definitely want to go back to it, you know?
Yeah, I was definitely well in the thick of that. I know I competed in 2014. I did I think it was Lyle McDonald's stubborn fat loss protocol, and that included some high intensity interval training that was like fasted, and also was doing power building. Basically, power building was like the thing at the time.
Yeah.
Just coming back to Novelty, when I think about it, I think about, you mentioned, hey, like you've been training for so long. If Novelty was the thing or Soreness was the thing, then playing football, like that doesn't align with what you know has led to growth, because we're pretty good. We're pretty sure that mechanical tension is like the prime driver of growth. And so when I think about Novelty, yeah, it can lead to like metabolic stress and muscle damage quite a bit. And maybe there is something there, but I think about how can I inject Novelty to improve mechanical tension? And I think that's kind of what we've drawn through there, where it's like, you're not going to get good mechanical tension through lifts that are causing pains and aches and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, Novelty, like I said, can be a really positive thing when it is reflective of you making a positive change, something that is introducing a new or improved stimulus to your program that is compatible with the type of adaptation you're trying to make, Because if a bodybuilder just said, hey, I want Novelty for its own sake and I want Soreness to be my proxy, I'd say, okay, we're doing a ton of plyometrics. We're doing, high volume, drop jumps from the box or depth drops or whatever they call them. And that would cause tremendous soreness. It would be new. There would be new adaptations happening. But if they're a bodybuilder, those adaptations aren't pertinent to what they are trying to achieve. And so it would be Novelty for its own sake, Soreness for its own sake, and we're not taking steps forward from doing that. One element of Novelty that I think is worth addressing for this particular audience and conversation is one area where I have seen a tiny bit of research. I'd love to see more, but a very common perspective, which I've definitely subscribed to in the past, is this idea that as a bodybuilder, you will benefit. I mean, this went hand in hand with the whole power building thing. The idea that you will benefit from doing dedicated strength focus blocks with low repetitions, high loads, training like a power lifter, basically, in terms of your set and rep loading ranges. You should do that sporadically to change up your stimulus, inject some Novelty, but that you will carry over that strength base into your next hypertrophy focused phase of training. And that will make it more effective. Instead of doing your sets of 12 with X load, you'll be doing 110% of X load for your hypertrophy training because you built up that lower rep strength. That line of thinking, while it is tremendously intuitive, and I totally accepted it without any critique or evidence, many years ago, it's not looking great in the literature. And that is kind of disappointing because it makes you feel like you have fewer levers to pull as a bodybuilder. Like if you thought doing periodic strength blocks were going to be your secret weapon, well, that's a little disappointing. but it's also kind of nice because I think it helps us refine our focus and get us back to what are the basics, right? Because yeah, of course we can grow on those high load, low repetition, high set kind of programs. We can stimulate the growth, but it's a pretty inefficient way to do it, right? So what's really nice about this kind of underwhelming literature is that it provides a very clarifying take-home point, which is that we generally know what a fairly time-efficient bodybuilding-oriented program looks like. And so when we do wish to inject elements of novelty or variety, we just need to make sure that we're doing it thoughtfully and with a very specific purpose. So if you're switching up an exercise, the justification, in my opinion, should not be, I'm switching it because novelty is good for its own sake. I think the literature would generally fail to support that notion. But if you're saying, you know what, I'm switching it because it's getting stale and I'm not having fun with it anymore, that's totally viable. That works. If you're switching it because you say, every time I do this, I notice that my right shoulder gets a little tight. It's been kind of nagging me a little bit. I want to do a different variation with a different grip. Of course, that's completely fine. If you say, that's been like a staple in my pressing exercises for like 6 training blocks in a row, and I think I've really been neglecting what I could be tapping into with just a slightly different angle or a slightly different, orientation of my grip. Again, that is strategically induced variety with the intention of producing a novel stimulus that's relevant to the adaptations you're shooting for. And all of those scenarios are perfectly viable, evidence-based reasons that you would inject some novelty. So there's things to be had from that type of emphasis on changing things and having variety and variation over time. But we should be cautious about celebrating novelty for its own sake.
Yeah, so well said, Eric. And just to make a very clear point on one of the downsides of novelty that I think people will be more than aware of in regards to how it can take away from mechanical tension and kind of progressive overload and even tracking. Like if you're changing things every week, it gets really hard to track that you're actually overloading and progressively overloading and kind of seeing those sequential PRs in the long run. But also you're kind of having that issue of relearning things and potentially also inducing a lot of damage that might take away from resources for growth and that sort of thing. And as we all know, it takes a little time to kind of groove with an exercise, like I said, learning it, but you almost get a better kind of mind-muscle connection. That's obviously got some research backing that helps with growth and things like this. So there's definitely, you don't want to change something, like you said, for the sake of changing it for novelty if it's already providing you everything that we would determine would lead to really good growth. Yeah.
And you're totally correct. I mean, when you talk to people who are really, when they're real program hoppers, or they're people who aren't even really on a set program and they just have this revolving door of exercises that they're tweaking and changing every couple weeks. If they come to you for a consult and they say, Steve, I was thinking about working with you, and you start saying, okay, well, let's talk about the progress you've been making lately. They won't even know what to tell you. They're spending most of their training, trying to figure out how to adjust the bench for this exercise. And the 2 weeks after they finally get everything lined up the way they like, they're on to the next thing. They're still kind of in those, kind of relearning stages of their motor pattern, and none of their exercises are really getting grooved the way they want to. It's like they're kind of in this continuous state of adjustment and preparation for the real meat of the program without hitting the real meat of the program. And if you ask them to quantify their progress in a meaningful way, it becomes, like you said, exceedingly difficult. It's like, I don't know, 6 weeks ago on this chest press machine, I did this many, and now I'm doing incline dumbbell press with that load. And you're like, well, I have no equivalence between the two. I have no way to convert which of those two is necessarily a stronger lift. So yeah, while I previously mentioned so many different practical benefits of novelty and variety, there are also real practical downsides of what we might consider excessive novelty or variety, especially when that novelty and variety is not being driven by any kind of specific thoughtful plan. You know, if it's just, we're going to change things up to confuse the muscle, I think we can pretty much put the nail in the coffin for that being true, you know, in its own sense.
Absolutely. Very well said. In regards to, for the listeners then, I think they have a good understanding of kind of the upsides and downsides of novelty, and not chasing novelty for its sake, but using it strategically to promote like more mechanical tension, really, which is kind of the main thing we're focused on. Do you have any kind of practical ways of doing it? Is it something you auto-regulate for people? I know I have some thoughts surrounding kind of, I don't know, compounds versus isolations versus experienced trainees versus more novice trainees, due to that kind of understanding the skill component of exercise and who can kind of get away with or benefit from varying things more.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the big things depends on your goal. So if you're a power lifter, we're not getting too far away from a barbell bench squat deadlift. You know, we might do some tweaks and work in a little bit of variety, but we can't get too far from the bread and butter, because that's the sport. Now, for someone who's more into bodybuilding or just general health, wellness, physique, etc., and exercise selection has no real constraint in terms of, like, you know, the exercise selection is not the sport, then we have more flexibility, more freedom. And what I personally like to do is, between training blocks, I check in and do like a little very brief questionnaire. But I just ask some questions, you know, what exercises are just feeling great? What exercises are you just not feeling? You know, anything that might be, I try not to like introduce a big nocebo effect and convince them everything hurts, but I try to kind of extract that key information of like, are there any exercises that you just want to skip on? And maybe it's because they're causing some mild discomfort or irritation. Maybe it's because you're just not grooving them right and you don't like them. Maybe there's a pain in the butt to set them up. And like for me, I hate an exercise that takes a lot of effort to set up in the gym. So I try to actually check in with a very deliberate set of questions between training blocks, so I can digest that information during a deload or a transition week, and then make sure that the next training block, I never want to pull out an exercise that somebody is absolutely in love with. And I want to make sure that every time we make training adjustments in terms of exercise selection, that there's real thought behind it. So the only way to really do that for me is with a really thoughtful process that occurs between training blocks.
Makes complete sense. Out of interest, how long does a general training block last for your guys?
Well, I don't actually coach anyone right now, but back in the day, I would actually fluctuate it. So I had some people who, they honestly, like, if we trained 3 hard weeks in a row, they would routinely tell me like I'm spent. And even if we worked the volume down pretty low, it was like, you know, to what extent that was physiological versus psychological, I don't know, but it didn't really matter. I could accommodate that, no big deal. But yeah, so I've had people who literally every 4th week was either like a deload or kind of a, you know, transition week. That was kind of a little switch up from their normal programming. And then I've had other people who are just, they're kind of more like me, where for me personally, when I'm healthy and training hard, I maybe do 2 or 3 deloads a year. And it's when I'm going to travel and I don't feel like finding a gym, basically. But, you know, so within that, you know, I kind of make a determination when I'm going to make a change in training block without a deload to kind of demarcate that. And I would say that usually a training block for me is anywhere in the 6 to 12 week range.
Yeah. That makes sense. That aligns with, I think, probably a lot of the people I work with. I think probably a lot of the listeners, they probably get to that point of, I guess I don't know if this is debated, but I kind of see it as just a cumulative fatigue. You just get to a point where you've got all the signs of potentially overreaching and training is kind of feeling a bit meh. You've got joint connective tissue, motivation's dropping off, all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
And I do a very similar process. I have like a checkbox next to every exercise. Do you want to keep it or rotate it? And do you have an idea of what you want to rotate it to? Let me know what it is. So I kind of use that for a sense. And it just makes it a lot easier for me to kind of, make those easy modifications. So if people aren't doing that, definitely have a tick box there if they want to keep it or not.
And if I may, I like the fact that yours is so direct. You know, you're not trying to like read through the signs. No. You're just like, do you want to keep it or not? And one of the things I would suggest to people who are coaches or aspire to be coaches, you don't have to like make your life harder. Like you are not doing anyone favors by guessing what your client wants. Now, you don't always do every single thing that your client wants. There will be some instances where a client says, I want to do this. And you say, listen, I really don't think that's in your best interest. And you talk it out. But for something like that, it's like some coaches, myself included in this, you know, as we see our differing kind of survey approaches, mine could definitely be improved by being more like yours because it's such a straightforward thing. And happy clients are the people who feel like, okay, you ask me relevant questions, and when I give you answers, you act upon them. And a great way to do that is like, that's a perfect way that you can't mess up as a coach is, you know, instead of me guessing what you like and what you don't like, why don't you tell me? And imagine that people are really happy when you do the things they like and you don't do the things they don't like.
Very well said. And it's just as you say, there is times of which I've wanted to kind of keep things where they maybe wanted to rotate it, where I was just like, hey, I don't think it makes sense just yet. And the other thing I wanted to say, so I kind of alluded to this in terms of level of experience / the skill set, because I think one of the biggest downsides to changing things is having to relearn it. So I kind of think less skill-based exercises like a bicep curl, something you could change way more readily, whereas like a big compound leg exercise, something you want to keep in as a staple for much more time. And then someone more skilled, someone more advanced, hey, they can move between a leg press and a squat pattern. It's going to maybe take a week or two to get grooved, whereas a novice, they're going to want to run with an exercise for much, much longer and not change it as long. But that works really nicely into the blocks because typically the less advanced you are, the less often you're going to have to deload and back off because of you're not doing as much basically to accumulate that fatigue. You adapt quicker, you can dissipate it faster versus someone more novel. So that kind of works itself out. But for isolation-based movements, I might allow someone to change it like within one of those blocks just because I'm like, hey, if that one, you're not jiving with it as someone relatively well advanced and we've seen form videos, you look good, maybe just change it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not worried about the cost of regrooving an exercise when it's a preacher curl, right? Yeah. Put your elbow on the pad, bend your elbow. You're pretty much there.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Nice. Yeah, I knew the topic of novelty wouldn't be too big of one to crack, but I'm glad we've done it because it's one that kind of comes up now and then, and especially the muscle confusion side, I think people are like, yeah, it's definitely a myth. But then this other side still pertains, and I think it's because of a lack of understanding, and it sounds like it's very much like it can play a role, but it has to be very specifically used as kind of strategic variation versus novelty for novelty's sake, which I think is basically what we've kind of said, and you've said really well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Eric, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to have to set up another time to get you back on to talk about some of those other very interesting things. So, so many things I'd want to ask you about it. But you mentioned Mass. I did want to just give a shout out to it. We are an affiliate with Mass, so that's always linked in our description. So you guys can, I highly recommend it. It gives me inspiration for learning every single time it comes out, for podcast episodes, for content. Like, it's brilliant as a resource. I can't recommend it highly enough. You guys do amazing work. And yeah, sorry, you were going to say something, and I highly recommend following Eric as well.
No, I appreciate the shout out for Mass and everything. I was going to say, I'm working on 2 papers right now that I think are going to be really, really clarifying, specifically when it comes to energy expenditure. So I would say if we can link up again in the 4 to 6 month time frame, there's definitely going to be a really cool conversation to be had there. So yeah, I'm excited to see what kind of work will be coming out of our lab in the next few months. It'll be a lot of fun.
Very exciting. Yeah, I love that stuff. It has such implications for, especially, I mean, bodybuilders specifically, but everyone, I think. And so, yeah, excited for that work and what you're doing. And if people want to hear more from you, I know you're very regular on Mass, but also you're part of the Iron Culture team, right? So you have your own podcast, basically.
Yeah. So obviously every month I'm publishing work in the Mass Research Review over at massresearchreview.com. You can find out about that. We did have a coup. Omar abandoned us at Iron Culture. So now Helms and I run the show. So Iron Culture podcast on YouTube and all the other platforms. You can find us there. And now that Helms and I run it, we try to bring on our other Mass co-authors, Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple and Dr. Mike Zordos, as regularly as we can get them on there. So it's become a whole group kind of family affair over there where we talk science and talk fitness. And we talk culture. I have to put that in there to appease Helms. Yes.
And there's still banter, so people won't miss that element. So yeah, thank you so much, Eric. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you in the next one.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.